started it. All right, so tonight we are discussing The Solace is Not the Lullaby by Jill Osier. So let's, as we always do, let's talk about the cover. What y'all think about the cover art?
I love this cover. It's really appealing to me. It just makes me think of a lot of different things, lightning bugs and lightning and a beacon of hope in the darkness. And it draws me.
Yeah.
Your fireflies are pretty irresistible, I think.
And there is a lot of darkness in this book. In fact, that word is used quite often, either dark or darkness. So it kind of fits with that.
Yeah. It reminds me so much of when there's this place in Indiana called New Harmony, Indiana. And by the river in the summer, the trees will be absolutely filled with millions and billions of fireflies. And it's like a light show. And you just go down there and you're awestruck by the beauty of it. And I immediately thought of that when I saw this cover.
Yeah. I went to college at the University of Evansville, and it's just pretty close to New Harmony. So
yeah.
I know what you're talking about. My husband had never seen fireflies till he came to Indiana, and he was just amazed.
Wow.
So.
Okay, so the book has, well, I think 6 sections in it. They're not titled, but they're just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any thoughts about that? Like, I didn't see any organizational pieces to that. So I'm not sure why some poems are in one section or another, but did anybody see anything?
I felt like it was really braided. Like the sections were not distinct. They may have had a tendency, but the book was sort of braided among several different important events.
Yeah.
Themes,
Like some of the images, recurring images showed up in all of the sections.
Yeah.
So what kind of recurring images or themes did you see in this book?
There was a lot of rivers, creeks, water, rain, and a lot of running too. The whoever is speaking is often running in in the poems.
Also snow and baseball.
Yeah, baseball.
Baseball, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I grew up in Iowa, which I think is a big baseball.
A mother and a brother.
And horses.
Horses, yeah. I thought of Shara Hammonds.
I did too.
I did too.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, river, field, roads, and horses. Yeah, there's a whole series of, and we were talking earlier, Sandy, about the knuckles, scuffed knuckles. There are little things like that come up throughout the book as well. I mean, I think to me the most prominent ones perhaps are the river and the road and the horse. I don't know, if I were centering like the 3 most prominent recurring images, it'd be those 3. Convince me otherwise. I should have one of those memes, like I'm sitting there.
And now we sit back and count everything to see how many times they're used.
I did think the small town came up a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Mark.
Awesome.
Well, one thing about this poet is that it's really hard to find out anything about her.
Really?
Yeah, did you find something? Annette?
Just no, not really. I mean, I was able to figure out about how old she was because I've been wondering about Yale younger poet, and it doesn't seem to have, you don't seem to have to be in your 20s anymore. So I was checking that out, and something in here or something I looked at made me think, okay, she's in her mid 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
raised the age limit. It used to be up to 40, and they did away with that. And you know, she's a fascinating kind of presence, at least for me. I know Michelle and I've followed her career, or whatever career. I mean, first book doesn't come out for 20 something years after we first began to read her poetry, and I'd find her poems in, the Southern Review or Black Warrior Review or wherever. And I don't know, there's something about a kind of enigmatic, like the full story is not exactly there. I think of, something like Emily Dickinson or Paul Celan or Marin Sorescu, Romanian, Karl Krolov, German poet, or Rainer, as another German poet. Anyway, there's lots of poets in the world who write a poem that isn't strictly narrative. It starts with a statement, but there seems to be a whole lot more not there than there is there.
Yeah.
But what is there is like, I mean, to me, like a really good example of this, which I just love, this poem on page 52. The steps in the snow lead around and around a place called Want. And maybe there's another discussion just about her titles.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's a separate, but let's hold on that one. But a little poem like this one, she says, at night, the horses rush the fence as sound. I mean, I have to admit, on a personal level, for me, it took me a while to realize what was going on there. It's like, did I misread this? I'm not following. But at night, the horses rush the fence as sound. Oh, it's not. You don't see them. It's just they're coming as sound.
Yeah.
But even that statement is so
Elliptical.
elliptical or mysterious.
I thought all her poetry was very elliptical. And what I wondered, because I thought the book kind of added up in some ways, still mysterious, but you would get little other pieces as you read. And what I kept wondering is how many of these poems would work as standalones, because they are so elliptical. And I think some of them could, some of them are there's a little more on the page and so forth. But I wondered if they would work as well as standalone poem, and maybe they would, and certain journals might really like the style, but yeah, that was what I wondered.
Well,
And if you look at the acknowledgments, like how many of these are published in this wide range of journals and well published, in some really well-known journals.
Yeah, I read that at the beginning and then I forgot about it when that question came to me. You're right, though. A lot of them were published.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot of mystery in her work. And like, she doesn't have a website. She's not on social media. There's a lot of mystery with her as far as what we're used to kind of seeing when we reach out to the poets that we chose for this book club. I can usually find them, and then I want to invite them to join us, but I could not find her. I could not reach her. So is she a teacher? Do we know anything about her?
Don't you feel like she's doing that on purpose? Like she just doesn't want to give out a lot of information about herself?
Well, she lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. And anybody that has been to Fairbanks it's a very depressing town.
Yeah.
It's a very dark town.
Well,
I don't know.
The poetry doesn't read like somebody who really wants to be out there.
Found, yes.
Well, these seem to me to be very personal poems.
Yeah.
And they are sort of solitary. I love this book, but it did seem to me that there was a lot that was not disclosed in them, although I felt a great deal of emotional connection with everything.
I agree, Linda, exactly.
There were a few lines in this book, though, that try as I may, I could not make sense of. Like, like the line you pointed out, Jeff, it's not all there, but I got that one. But there were a couple that I was like, there's just something in my brain that's missing or something, because I cannot follow this line.
Can you point one out, Annette? Do you have one in mind that you're thinking of?
I did mark one. Hang on. No, that's not it.
Hey, while you're looking for that, Annette, I want to read the rest of that little small poem on 52, because I think in a way, it's a kind of microcosm. It might be not the only one that could be a microcosm for this book, but the steps in the snow lead around and around a place called Want. At night, the horses rush the fence as sound, then as everything else. I try to sleep beneath the owl now. My thoughts fly ahead, sweeping back to me, out of breath. We have seen every edge, they say, and you were right. Now, I may be the only kind of person who loves stuff like that. Well, in fact, I think of
I love stuff like that.
I think of a poet like who's not as well known as she should be, or maybe she is known, but Joe McDougall, whose books were published for many years by University of Arkansas Press and then Autumn House Press. And she'd have these little, almost like small vignette type 9 lines, 15 lines, almost like a small play going on. But added up together, they just seem so vast. And I feel something like that with Jill Osier's work.
Yeah. Brought to my mind Ellen Voigt and the way those poems were so missing. And I kind of felt that in here. There was so much missing that you were kind of making leaps, and some of it you didn't quite make. But I did like the reoccurring images so often, because that kind of grounded you at the same time. But I couldn't figure out a narrative, and I like narrative, so I kept trying to figure out a narrative and coming up going, what? But I just read the foreword today, and that made a little sense to me, some of the things that were pointed out in the foreword. Then I kind of saw it as a bigger global, then I got lost in each poem a little bit. So enjoyed it, but it was work.
Yeah.
Anybody else in the poem, Small Town, when she, that she's standing in the rain, she's getting the rug wet.
Yeah.
And the person who wasn't home was bowling. That really kind of pulled me out. I thought that was an unusual choice of activity. I mean, maybe it's actually exactly what was happening, but did anybody else feel sort of startled by the bowling?
I was surprised.
I can see that in small towns. Yeah, there were bowling leagues. It was the thing to do in my small town in Arkansas. So that didn't bother me at all. I was like, oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah, I work in a small town, and that's one of the things that a lot of people get together and do is bowling. But I don't do that. So I was kind of put off. I was like, bowling? Oh okay. So, but I don't do baseball either. And so every time she mentioned baseball, I was like, wait, no, it is a female. It was just kind of like, I kept looking back going, baseball, okay. I don't know.
That reminds me also of her poem where she talks about the bachelor, and it's kind of startling when she suddenly says, I wonder if he is reading. And it seems like she has a kind of connection to everything around her, but it's like she's always 100 yards away, you know. So she's just like she's elusive in real life. The speaker always being alone or being an observer, you know, from some distance. To me, that becomes a kind of theme or a character also, you know, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and there's the lack of resolution. Like it starts off with something you're following, and then it switches on you, and you're left kind of, wow, you know, like where did that come from? Which I think is really, really interesting.
Well, you know, you were asking earlier about the sections. And it seems to me the first section has a lot to do with sound or listening. I mean, the very first word in the book is listen. The last word is home. And so in some ways there's maybe a conversation or an arc that goes on between the last word and the first word and the last word. But even in that first section, you know, if you look at page 6, which is, I think, what, the 4th poem in, it says at the very end, I must have, but I heard it like thunder, not right away, not until later. That kind of like a detonation later, some other, you know, which feels like reading some of the poems. You read them, and then there's like a delay of recognition or understanding that happens. And then back up a page, on page 4, the very ending of that one, when we loved again, perhaps a sound, we were actually trying to hear fabric. We listened for corners.
Yeah, I mark that as, you know, she's a very sonic poet. She talks about sound in things that don't make a sound, like fabric.
Yeah.
So that poem was, I love that poem, except the part "some handle." And I couldn't make sense of "some handle" in that poem unless that was like your handle on the world or something. Might have been that piece of fabric, but I couldn't figure out handle unless it was explaining the fabric. If it was a separate thing, then I didn't know what she was saying.
So often children, young children, have a fabric that they want to hold. And
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
that was, you know, where I went with that.
So that's their handle.
They were looking for something that was comforting or you know, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the first thing we loved, we don't even remember.
Yeah.
A corner of fabric. I'm reminded of my son's blanket.
That was a blue
that
blanket.
he just held on to and loved.
And sucked the thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, blue blankie we had.
Yeah. Yes, it was a blue blankie.
You know, even that poem on page 4, Some Roads in Iowa, I don't know if it was here where I began to think about it, but I always kind of take a few notes as I proceed, but I was suddenly beginning to notice the aphoristic kind of statement line that she has, and she has several of these throughout the book. We are never loving what we think we are. You know, that's an aphorism, right? It's just a mysterious statement. Brief.
Seasons always have the good ideas before we do, something like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a lot of these and through the book. And I'm increasingly, I guess, the older I get, the more I really appreciate those, almost maybe more than images. Although I think I always started more as an imagistic poet, and I still love images. And she's really good at them also.
Did anybody think in this poem that she was being really tongue-in-cheek when a dead end no boulevard? I mean, this little town in Iowa on a dead-end street called Boulevard? I don't know. I didn't laugh in her poems except that, that I was like, I think that's funny. I don't know.
But it's also I think it's characteristic, you know, I mean, isn't there, like, even around here, I wrote down several things years ago. Isn't there like, Michelle, you may know this, isn't there like there's Gist Street, Gist. There's Gist Street up in Franklin, Tennessee. There's Darwin's Barbershop. I don't know about that. That seems, I'm not sure I want to take my chances going in there. But there, you know, there'd be these names like that are really kind of wonderful.
I know a bunch of little towns in Texas that are at best 1 block long, but their street is a boulevard. The street that goes through it, because you have the little street where the townspeople can wander around in their cars, and then you have the highway over on the other side, and sometimes they're named something Boulevard. So, you know,
Some roads in Iowa.
Yeah. Texas, yes.
So one of the poems that I marked, I actually didn't mark as much as I thought, but was the one on page 6, which I loved, but it had lots of leaps in it, it seemed like. So I wasn't really sure. Like when you're checking in the purse, check and see if the neighbors have any. Was that fear? I mean, where was fear? Where was it? Check my purse, check and see if the neighbors have any. I heard no. So I'm thinking, okay, the neighbors don't have any fear. I must have, but I heard it like thunder, not right away, not until later. I don't know. I wasn't sure that I got it, but I mean, I think that's okay. It was very provocative, but and like even the beginning, before there was a pink sky, there was a jet white horse on lips soiled stationary promising rides.
This may be perfectly crazy, but I took the jet white horse to be cocaine or heroin or something. And so if, you know, check and see if the neighbors have any, you know, and
oh boy, I didn't go there.
Huh?
I said, boy, I didn't go there. But
Me neither.
Well, I don't know why I did, except the business of check and see if there is any anywhere. And then when she says, I heard no, I must have, but I heard it like thunder. You know, as you get older and realize what it does to you, not right away, not until later. You know, don't ask me why I went there, but I did.
Another poem I marked was on page 39, 1979.
Oh yeah.
And I wrote, is this about fireflies? But then I looked back at it and thought, no, I don't think it's about fireflies. But then I looked at the cover and thought, well, maybe it is about fireflies, but I don't know. This ring of fur I couldn't make, but it seemed like it was something in a jar with holes poked in it in a hot garage.
I didn't get this one at all. And I did anybody figure out why it's called 1979? I mean, I couldn't connect anything in the poem with 1979 specifically.
And by the way, white horse is a slang for cocaine.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I don't know these things.
But I don't know if that's connected to this poem or not. It's just.
Well, no, I don't either, but I did know that, you know, what you said, that it was a connection.
Well, I kind of think it makes sense, Linda.
Well, I don't know. You know, it's all in the reading. If I want to read it that way, that's fine, but somebody else can read it a totally different way.
Yeah, but 1979.
This fly a screen stretched pregnant cot. Okay, that was a line that I was like, yeah, I don't know. I do not know. This fly a
The
screen.
fly was on the screen.
I mean, it could be a memory of catching fireflies and putting them in the jar. I mean,
or screen doors very often because kids would push them, would end up being bowed out, almost like
Yeah, yeah.
maybe look pregnant. And I guess maybe I thought of 1979 as related to, that the age that she might have been in 1979.
Even 5.
With that first plucked from oak bark, this ring of fur, I thought about, what an animal, might leave rubbing up against a tree. But the rest of it, I really
Could
wouldn't.
be caterpillar.
Huh?
Oh, maybe
The ring of
caterpillar in a
fur
jar.
plucked from an oak bark. She could have picked up a caterpillar.
Yeah.
Because it's going in a jar with a lid, and then grass is going in
And
there.
3 small holes.
And 3 small holes. And then hope I'll see you, I thought must be like sarcastic. I don't know.
Or like, I hope you don't die and I'll see you in the morning.
Yeah, and enjoy the already
die.
dead heat of
I read
the
that as a direct address to Hope.
Oh, okay.
Hope, I'll see you.
Yeah, that's what I did for that one.
Or if it's a caterpillar and it's going to turn into a butterfly,
Yeah.
there's hope.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it took all of us to figure something out, and who knows if it's right.
Well, hey, y'all have heard me say this before, but Robert Bly said it years ago in a reading. A poem is too much for one person's mind. And that's okay, because we have a room full. So.
I like what Carl Phillips said in the introduction about this poem, "The Horses Are Fighting." He was talking about how often when we're in workshops, someone says, I don't know enough about the speaker. I want to know more about the speaker. And, that's like literally one reason I quit going to workshops. I remember Dana Joya some years ago speaking about Frost's poem, "Acquainted with the Night." And he talked about that exact fact, how little we know about the speaker and what an incredible poem it is. And that kind of set me free a bit to stop worrying about that. And, that happens a lot, I think, in this book. I mean, one could argue maybe too much, but, he said if you're in a workshop, somebody might say, get rid of the first 2 stanzas and keep the third one and talk about the speaker. And I was thinking, yeah, but the problem for me with that is sisters angry in some small kitchen. To me, that's worth the whole poem. That's worth 3 poems. That's just so great in so many levels. So I think her poems are very high risk, and none of them are really bad because they all have at least one interesting line. But how many of them really work and feel whole? I think she's playing a high risk game, and I might pick 4 or 5, and then the others I like lines from. But it's high risk. But here's her book. It worked for her. She did well. Congratulations, Jill.
Yeah, Mark, I love that statement. Thank you for saying it. That's worth the whole poem. And I've thought that so often, about any poet I read. There's the part of me that teaches. So there's, okay, I want the poem that I can show to a class, and then we can, it can be in the list of ones that they perhaps write an essay about and account for everything that's there. But it's really hard to find those poems that are like a whole world unto themselves that you can just keep going back to over and over. But in reality, I don't think I even read to find those poems. I find this stanza or these lines in this William Stafford poem or whoever, and that's worth the whole poem. And sometimes it's worth the whole book. It's like I buy the book just for something I read in the book.
Let's talk about the title poem.
I want to know when she decides that she's going to title a poem like "From," and when she's going to write a whole sentence.
So
I don't know.
Page 29. So this poem has one of those mysterious it's in it. And several of the poems do, where suddenly there's an it, undefined, but important.
Sandy, you want to read that poem? I mean, hers are short enough.
Yeah, yeah. The solace is not the lullaby, but that anything can be a lullaby. When the German shopkeeper died, they said, go back to what you know. So there was math. There was standing at the stove stirring soup until my father came home. There were bruised train cars and an untruth, day and night, shadowing the town streets. When authorities found it, curled asleep outside his house, their questions fell into the dark grass. There was a beating of silence then, until it was a new quiet they had to pick up and carry away.
I thought the last 5 lines were magnificent. I mean, I don't mean to disparage the beginning of the poem, but I just thought, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, right? But I don't know that I can say what this poem means or is trying to say, or
Yeah, but it,
Cryptic.
sometimes maybe poems don't need to mean, they just provide a kind of experience. I don't know.
I thought you were going to say that they could just be.
They could be. Yes, exactly. I mean, I like the it. It is evocative and it makes me think of a lot of possibilities. So I'm really engaged in the poem. And the other poems too, trying to figure out what it is. And I want to use pronouns like this sometimes, but I never get away with it. You know, I'm always told I need to define things, you know, clarify. And I probably do, but she does it well.
I have a
which kind of
tendency
makes
to
me
make up
think,
stories to go with the poems that I don't understand. I just make up a story that seems to fit what she's writing about.
what was your story for this one?
Well, when the German shopkeeper died, they said, go back to what you know. I was assuming that that he did something that, or rather the German shopkeeper was the one who kept everybody alive, who financed them or whatever. And they said, go back to what you know. So the father had to take over at that point, and what he knew had to do something with math and maybe working in a factory. And, you know, then they were waiting for him to come home. There were bruised train cars and an untruth. And I thought the untruth was what was curled up and asleep in the yard. Now, I'm not sure what that was exactly, but it was something that had to do with illegality or something that wasn't politically correct, perhaps. And there was a beating of silence then until it was very quiet. They had to pick up and a new quiet they had to pick up and carry away. That to me was that they had replaced this the untruth with something else that was also untrue, probably. I think about our political situation right now where people find untruths that they don't like, so they make up a new one. They decide they denigrate that somehow and replace it with another one, which may be just as bad, which sort of goes back to the title in a way, that solace is not the lullaby, but that anything can be a lullaby, that, it's not, even though you still don't, you're supposedly comforted, but it's more just a quietening of whatever is wrong with what was in the yard. I don't know. Yeah, we weren't supposed to ask me to explain.
So
I
here's a
loved
hard
your
question.
explanation.
You see how strange I am. So
I love it. Here's a hard question. So how generous are we being because these poems are published in a book? And would we be this generous if people in our workshop groups brought a poem like this? And would we be this generous to that person, or would we, you know, potentially shut down something that is a leaping poem or a background story?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I used
good
to be
question.
an editor of a journal, and I was looking at some of these poems through an editor's eye and thinking, I don't know if I'd be calling bullshit or if I'd be saying, well, you know, that's an interesting poem. I don't know. But sometimes when you get a bunch of submissions, you pick the ones that you understand and not the ones that you don't.
Yeah.
But I think that goes back to that little jewel of language in so many of these that just captures the reader, that makes them want to hang on to the poem. Maybe
Well,
not
I
this
will
particular
say
poem,
that
maybe not, but
I read straight through this book the first time I picked it up, and it was for those little jewels of language. Even though I didn't understand things in the poem, so they felt right to me. And like I say, I would read one and then I'd have to go ahead and go on and read the next one. But you know, that's just me. I have no idea how an editor would look at it. So
yeah. And the
I
other
wasn't-
question, kind of parallel, KB, to this, how much do we give away in our poetry when maybe if we pulled back and restrained a little bit in our efforts to be accessible, I don't know, could that teach us something about our own writing that maybe, I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
I think so.
Okay.
I had a workshop with Cecilia Willett one time, and she had you write sonically, and she said, it doesn't matter to me if the poem makes any sense. Just let the words, you know, spill out and let them have a beat to them. And we got some great results that way. But I let my husband read them. He goes, well, what does this mean? And I'm like, well, it doesn't mean anything. You know, it's just supposed to sound interesting.
In the forward on, I guess it's page 11, it says, but what if Osier suggests the fragment is the story? Or more sobering will have to be because it's all we've got. And he's referring to her use of the it there. And
Yeah.
One of the things I think I love about her poems is that kind of Sappho, or, you know, just you get those fragments in between. And she does a lot with silence, which is, I think, what any good musician can do, you know, using silence. And so it's one of those things I love. But I love that question about would we be as generous with these poems? I know early in her career, she was published in Poetry Magazine. And so how much does having that on your cover letter influence, you know, somebody's ability to take in your words or your poems?
Yeah.
If she hadn't had that, maybe we wouldn't be reading this whole book right now.
Well, it took a long time. You know, it took a long time for a first book. I mean, there are these chapbooks, right? I don't know if y'all can see this one.
Yep.
And then of course so I mean, there are those, but I mean, I've been waiting on a book for a long time. I mean, maybe long. I mean, I waited on a book. What am I saying here? I waited on a full length book collection, you know, from Bobby Rogers for 20 years. But when it finally got the book, it was like, well, this may be one of the most perfect books. I mean, this is better than almost anything I've read in a decade. But you know, a book like this one, there was a poem that I thought of as you guys were talking, just on page 20, on death. This is the closing poem to section 2. She says, I might have guessed, running the streets that night, running each right down the middle, not meeting a car, rain soaking and so soft, my arms held out for the last corner to the house, that the dark figure sitting on the porch swing would be my mother, the night and night's storm like a sentence she could no longer be subject or object for. And to me, that's a whole poem. I mean, it's a whole in the sense that I don't have to be generous with it. It seems full and complete. It you know, I can diagram the sentence. And it seems to syntactically pull itself out. But it's interesting too that subject and object. I mean, if I want to really think about that and think about it toward other places in this book, it has really interesting implications, I think. I mean, her mother is the subject at times, and the mother is the object at times. And if I think of a poem like what was the one we were talking about, Kansas, on page 16, I think the mother maybe is the object of abuse. I have to maybe read into the poem for that, but you know, subject and object are these grammatical terms, but they're also real for what people are. They are the subject of the story, or the subject of an observer's story, but they're also the object of what other people impose upon, you know, their stories. So I don't know, that just seems wonderfully complex to me to think about.
Yeah. And KB, what do you know, with your question, what are your thoughts about these poems in this book?
Well, I think I heard a lot of answers like from an editor viewpoint, but what worries me, not worries necessarily, but what troubles me, I guess, is that I go to a lot of workshops with other poets, and we workshop our stuff with each other. And I know that if I gave them something with an undefined it, they would say, no, you can't do that. And so I wonder, I guess that was where my question was, are we being generous? Because I mean, of the 43 poems in this book, 39 are published. So, you know, I just wonder, am I maybe putting too much emphasis on what a workshop group thinks instead of running it past other people? Maybe I should just, you know, I never send out a poem without having had it workshopped from at least one person. And you know, of the people I know, I don't think I would have been able to get away with some of these poems. And so it just makes me wonder, am I limiting my writing by asking other people, you know, for their opinion before, you know, should I just sit in my corner and do my thing and then just send it out and see what happens, instead of asking other people, well, you know.
Yeah. And maybe there's a mix, maybe there's a happy mix in there that you could experiment, you know, like this poem, I'm just going to do with what it feels like the poem wants to be, and then send that out and skip the workshop and
Or
just see what happens.
You don't have to take their advice. You can always workshop it and see what people say, and then
Sure.
still it comes down to your heart and what it feels right for you. And sometimes you do, like you take risk. You take the risk.
Sure. And the older I get, the more I find myself going, that's a valid point and I appreciate it, but and I don't say it to them, but in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to change that.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to feel more powerful in and of yourself to do those kind of things, especially if you're dependent on your group. You get to where you give them so much power, and sometimes you have to take it back for yourself.
But now here's the question. Myself as a reader, I wouldn't let my workshop group get through with some of these poems.
I wouldn't
so now my question becomes, am I limiting other people?
Yeah.
And I thought what Sandy said was very apt. Maybe we're giving too much away in our poems. Maybe I need to think, and I know that for me personally, because I'm very drawn to narrative, and oftentimes it's so narrative that I have to, go pick stuff out, take stuff out. And so maybe I'm still not doing that enough. When I read a poet like this that has had so much success publishing, it makes me go, well, yeah. And oftentimes I feel that way reading stuff that is modern and published. It's like, I'm too married to narrative. So it does help you to identify where your strengths and weaknesses are and where maybe you need to take risks.
Right.
I love it.
I think there's a paradox in this situation also, because from what people are saying, I think a lot of us really enjoyed these poems as a book and aren't sure what we would think if we read two of them. And yet she did work hard enough at sending them around that almost all of them are published individually.
Yeah.
So I think it's a funny kind of paradox. I understand what everybody's saying, and it's interesting that she did get the individual poems published, but I think we all feel like they are strongest as a book, where we get used to that voice, we get used to the leaps, and even get kind of eager to get to the next one.
Yep.
KB, you may know the story that William Stafford tells about his poem Traveling Through the Dark. And he takes that to a workshop and he reads it, and at the end when he says, push the deer over into the river, everybody in the workshop said, oh no, Bill, you can't end it like that, and he said, I just thought, well, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to end it right there. He said, I gave up trying to revise it and send it out. But if you, I've seen a little video of this, you see the places he sent it to, one after another: rejection, 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 accepted by the Hudson Review. And it took a long time. And so several years. And that's probably his most anthologized poem.
And there's something haunting about that. I hated that poem when I first read it in high school. And I thought, how could anybody do that? Yeah. How could anybody write about that? And now he make me read it, but it's still so haunting. And I appreciate it, even though that's not, it hurts me. The ending hurts.
But then, it's a good illustration of how, what a workshop might, I don't know. I mean, we've all been part of workshops. I haven't been a part of one for years, but I think even I realized in graduate school, for instance, that there's a particular kind of reader that I'm aiming for. And I could look around the table and it's not you, and it's not you, and it's not you, and because we're not only limited as writers, we're limited as readers also. And so maybe there's a particular kind of reader that we can write our poems for. And that's just, maybe it's a small room. Was that the little ideal audience? Remember that little poem by Kay Ryan? It's just maybe half a dozen or something like that. It's a very small group.
Yeah.
Or the Ted Kooser one where she puts the book back.
Puts the book, selecting a reader. Yeah.
Or maybe we're writing for us and not so much for the reader. And maybe we're saying what we need to say in the power of language that we hold.
Yeah.
And, readers be damned.
That reminds me when I met Virginia Mort here in DC some years ago, and she was here for a while, and I was at a bookstore and read a few poems, and she told me which one she liked the best, and she said that poem was necessary. And I think that matches, Sandy, what you're saying. That poem was something I had to write, whether other people liked it or not, whether it got published. And that was an interesting choice of words, I think, on her part. That is very useful, I think.
Well, look at, I'm going to read 14 more poems before we're done here. But look at page 57, that little poem called Vespers. I mean, what, 1, 2, it's 6 couplets, and they're really even short couplets. Tonight, my neighbor's burning a fire next to his trailer. That's such an that's a ordinary detail. It's something I've seen. I catch glimpses of his red cap through the smoke. The people I've watched die said, finally, you smell good, or your hands are cold, or you've left me more confused than ever. Outside, the yard goes black. My neighbor's wife goes to him by flashlight, and he bends to greet the dogs. I just love that. I just love it.
Yeah.
And the poem that's right next to it on the other page is,
Yeah.
very similar in some sense. It's shaped differently on the page, but
Yeah, in that poem that you're talking about on 56, I love down in the 3rd stanza, the way that finishes up, the day like a whirl slipping through its own hands. I love that.
Mm. And what a genius line break.
Yeah. One thing I wondered about in going through this, there's which one is it? I think I made a note on it. It's the one that has the colons in front of.
Oh yeah, Nest on page 43.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I wondered if she just had a bunch of phrases she liked and sort of went together, and that's how she just put them down here.
That's what I thought.
I mean, it
Well,
seems
it makes us listen, right? I mean,
yeah, it does.
So we listen. In what way can each of these be a nest? And maybe it's a precursor to the, as I said, the book ends on the word home, but there seems to be at least a poem or two where there's the leaving of home. She begins the book by being outside of someone else's home. There's the bachelor that we've mentioned as well, that home. So home, or what that means, or the nest that might mean, sometimes it's, is she finding it? Maybe it's in a sentence. Maybe it's in a phrase. I know on page 8, she says something about the hollow more than the shape.
Yeah. That comes up a few times.
Yeah.
Hollow, emptiness.
The shape is certain.
The shape.
It's not in this book, but some of you may have watched, I know there's a video of her reading with Matthew Zapruder and yeah, for the Alaska Quarterly Review. And there's a poem that she read in that. She said, "My sentences offer only half of themselves. I fear I taught them this."
I fear what?
I fear I taught them this.
Oh.
Which is a poem in itself right there.
Yeah, but it's just it's a statement that she makes within a poem. But as soon as I heard it, it just seemed to resonate, because so many of these poems feel like, the sentences are half of the story. Well, even Carl Phillips makes note of that in his introduction, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
there's so much
With
left
that-
untold.
That particular poem called Story. It might have happened at the river, petting the wild swan, the pure-breasted, black-eyed, silent one, drawing us down in our dresses and suits through branches and mud to banks, wet and hidden.
Let's let's go around and say what our favorite poem is,
Hmm.
if you have one.
Ooh.
And if it's short enough, maybe we can read them. They're all pretty short poems. Kathleen, what is your favorite poem?
Oh, you're on mute, Kathleen.
Muted.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, my dog was whining. I'll take that Vespers poem. I just thought the images all matched up and it all made sense to me. And it was, you know, kind of a fancy Episcopalian word for a not very Episcopalian place. And I'll take that one.
Okay. KB, what was yours?
I didn't really have a favorite one. I had lines that it's funny because Jeff kept reading my lines. And I thought, oh, I underlined that one too. So yeah, it was the hollow more than shape is certain. The last three lines of fall I must have, but I heard it like thunder, not right away. Although now I'm gonna have to go back and rethink whether I really do like those lines if it's about drugs. We are never loving what we think we are. Your door is never locked. You know, I just had lines that called to me, but there wasn't one poem that really stood out for me.
Okay. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, page 12 and 13. I really like Grip. I don't know. I might choose the poem from. Can I read it?
Yes, please do.
Sometimes the light, as we all sat down to supper, was briefly the very blue of our collars. We took this in every weather as warmth. Later, I felt us pulling something up against the wind of those who seemed to know an easier way. Yeah, there's almost nothing in that poem, and I think it works wonderfully. You know, we got a few blue shirts and a people sitting around a table with nothing we see on it. It's so incredibly minimal, and yet I think it's one of the poems in the book that kind of reaches out in a social dimension, bigger way. You could view it even as kind of political. It's just an amazing poem, I think, and I think the word seemed. There's a lot of weight on that word in this poem. You know, they seemed to know a better way. So, I'm not sure that she's convinced of what thoughts they had, but the experience of it was very powerful to her and creates this wonderful, really small poem.
Great. Yeah, love it. Annette, what is yours? Do you have one?
I mean, I like a lot of these, but I'm going to choose one that's a little bit different on page 25, Chances of Finding a Heart at an Auction. Because I love this. It's kind of sort of a little bit narrative, and it depicts this woman in the town. I'm not really.
Can you read it for us?
Yeah, I will. I'm not really a person who thinks poems have to be narrative, but I did like this. Chances of Finding a Heart at an Auction. There are maybe two ways you can make this town smaller. Cut off everyone's feet or close one eye. A woman mowed her lawn for years, tube topped in terry cloth, hair and scarf, atop a red snapper. She wore dangly earrings, punching perfect rows of circles in kids' school lunch tickets. She married, adopted, divorced, all the time mowing her large lawn on the edge of a little town. She was slender and did sweatpants a favor. Even her feet were brown, red snapper goddess. I am standing on her clean sheared grass, bidding to a jabbering cowboy hat. There are tricks to this. Don't scratch your head, hide your interest, stay cool against dealers looming coon-eyed and fat. The biggest trick is not wanting anything too much. The yard is covered with townsfolk numbered like cattle and branded by false sun on one side of their faces. The sky shines removed and blue to the heart, true to its name, like a long lost cousin. I could just cry.
I like that one too.
Mm.
Beautiful. Ione, what about you?
Well, I was going to pick from, but Mark stole that one. So I'll pick the first poem in the book that you've mentioned before, the small town. I just like how, as you read the poem, you realize what's going on, and you're like, oh my gosh, you know. By the end, you're like, okay, that's kind of creepy. So I liked it a lot. I'll read it. Small town. Listen, the rug is wet because I stood here, because it started pouring, because your door was open and I was under a tree, because it was raining, because the rain and the tree both were in your backyard, because so was I, because you weren't home, because I knew you were bowling, because I walk your road, because your road goes by your house, because I felt like a walk, because it was going to rain, because your door's never locked.
Love it. Michelle, what about you? Do you have one?
That one's probably my favorite as well. And the line I love so much is because I walk your road, or the two lines, because your road goes by your house, which suggests an intimacy there of some sort, maybe between her and the person who's bowling. And I love the way bowling brought thunder into the poem right there.
I didn't think there was intimacy. I got the feeling that she was breaking in somebody's house and standing in their
Talking.
house. A stalker. I thought she knew he was not home because she's a stalker. That's how I felt about it. So I loved it. I thought it was intriguing. I made my own story. So
I think Carl agreed with you in his forward a little bit.
yeah, I did read that, and that I was interested in that because that's how I had seen it from the very first. So
I just want to say, I thought Carl Phillips' introduction was elegant and wonderful.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that.
I agree.
how
His,
many
pro-
of you
his
read
prose
that
is good.
before you read the poems? Because I didn't want to read it before I read the poems because I wasn't familiar with her at all.
I
I
read the
read it
poems
first.
first also.
Yeah.
I read about half a dozen of the poems randomly. Then I read the introduction, and then I read the whole book.
But I had already read her chat book, one of her chat books, so I was already kind of familiar with her stuff. So,
You know, that particular poem, though, I mean, I get what Carl Phillips is saying about it and what some of the others have said as well, but I think there's the way it is structured with this, essentially this list of because, but each one kind of peels off another layer. And, you know, I as y'all know, I always kind of obsess about the first poems in books and how they kind of set in motion an argument. And I think that's one of the things about her. I mean, there's a layering of context upon a previous context. And then that creates a new context that creates another layer or something. It's just a kind of weird thing that goes on in her syntax. But I think this particular poem at the very beginning does that. And it also sets in motion this kind of outsider looking in upon road, small town, maybe some level of intimacy with people, but then also her own home, leaving home later in the book. I just think it turns out to be a really great choice.
I thought as a first poem, it really captured me. I almost, in a way, as I kept reading it, I was a little, because there was just so many holes. I mean, yeah, it's layer by layer by layer, but some of them are translucent and some of them are solid, and you can't figure out what that layer has anything to do with anything else. So that was frustrating to me as somebody that usually is drawn to narrative.
Well, look at though what's going on if you take it apart. She says, "Listen, the rug is wet because I stood there." All right. Well, why did you stand there? Because it started pouring. Well, okay, because your door was open and I was under a tree. Why were you under a tree? Because it was raining. Because the rain and tree were. It's sort of like she's going backwards in time.
Yeah.
In a way,
I love
to
that.
explain this.
May be kind of interesting that the first word in the whole book is listen.
Listen.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Listen to what I'm not saying.
Which also, if you move the letters around, is silent, right? Since
Yeah.
a lot was silent throughout the whole poem, or throughout the whole book.
Well, and that maybe that is her perspective. I think on page 54 and 53 and around in there's a poem where there's the top stair, which is soil level, but also there's sky, you know. So that made me start thinking about the ways in which her poems play around with perspective, and you know, where do we see it from is the question kind of thing, and where she sees things, the vantage point from which she interprets the world. I think some of it, just some of it is syntactical. That's her perspective.
All right. Linda, did you have a favorite?
I had so many favorites, and a lot of them have already been read. But on page 47, November Elegy, it's really a short poem, and I found it just very poignant. It seemed to me that she was speaking about, you know, things that we think about when we get older and how we learn to understand or to wonder more about those who came before us. November Elegy. Who were they, those women watching the sky lose heat, while I, with the dark played, fell to the yard again and again, the cold then merely a smell on me. Thinking back from childhood. And who were those women?
Yeah. Love it. Jeff, did you have a favorite?
You know, the one I read earlier about the steps in the snow lead around and around a place called Want. I love it. Also, I mean, just for a poem that has not been mentioned, but I really love, is called Requiem on page 58.
I was just going to bring that up. I love
Yeah.
that.
That's my favorite.
Oh, okay. Well,
No, go ahead. I want you to read it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd love to hear Michelle read it. Would you read that one,
Will you
Michelle?
read it?
No, you're not. You're
No?
going to say no to me. Okay. Well, then I'll read it. Requiem. Across the street, two boys begin to bury a girl in leaves. Kneeling at her side, they show her how to cover her face. Don't forget to breathe, I imagine they tell her. And what they really should say is, try to remember the smell of sun through it all. It's a rare courtship. I watch her help, gathering the leaves to her like love, hiding herself. No matter how many, it's the same heavy. One leaf will find its way beneath her shirt. Another will tickle her lip. What she'll hear is almost like breathing, and it must be the leaves. Sounds beyond love, sounds beyond love. Remember, I would tell her, there are such things.
That's very beautiful.
Yes.
I love the use of the word courtship. in this poem. It seems so, I don't know, it seems like a really unusual word within this poem.
Yeah.
But it also maybe sent me back through the book to think about the ways in which how are things a rare courtship? And then that made me think about the horses. You know, I don't know. There's delightful things like this throughout.
Yep. And there's the smell in this poem too.
Yeah.
Like in Linda's poem, the cold then merely a smell on me.
Yeah, in this in the Requiem poem, I think my favorite line is no matter how many, it's the same heavy.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I don't know that what other poet ever wrote that line. But as soon as we encounter, it's like, yeah, so yeah. It's like, and you can keep adding to it, but it's the same heavy. I don't know, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Which isn't heavy.
Yeah.
Mhm. She didn't say it stays light or,
Same heavy.
Yeah, the same heavy.
Well, but the implications too for that are because of the darkness and the other things in this book, there is some kind of heavy things.
Yeah.
And then this is the sort of being buried by all of that,
Well, Requiem was my favorite poem too, but I'm gonna finish us off with the last poem in the book.
Oh, good.
And the last word in the book is home. But this is on page 59, Shell Rock Song. It's less important why and more important where we leave some things. I should have learned this by now, grown in a small river town, collecting as a girl colored stones from clear, shallow depths. Before home, they'd have dried themselves dull. They left my pockets wet. Today at the river, only the geese were there, held in glare of winter sun. Again, I tried to take the shape of solitude at the side of a river. Again, I stood motionless, yet they were more still. I stayed, adoring them, over an hour in the cold, waiting, I think, for them to love me. Then I walked home. I thought that was a perfect ending for this book.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I think unless anyone else has anything they would like to share, we can get done.
I have a reading on Thursday if anybody wants to go.
Yes, KB. And you are with, how do you say, Janice? Janice Ray?
Janice Ray, who wrote Ecology of a Cracker Childhood.
Oh, I love Janice Ray.
Yeah, she's there, and Karen Sawyer McElmurray, who I think is one of the editors with, oh my gosh, with Marianne Worthington.
Yes, it's still.
Still.
Have you met Janice Ray?
No, I've just talked to her via email.
She came to Belmont, I don't know, 10 years ago or something for the Humanities Symposium. She was just wonderful. So
I loved when I saw that she was sending out a book with Iris the same time I was like, what? It's unbelievable.
We may have to check out that book. So her book is Red Lanterns. Karen's is Voice Lessons, and KB's Edge of the Echo.
Right. Mine and Janice's are poetry, and Karen's is essay.
And these are newly published Iris Press books. Bob and Beto.
The poem Red Lantern was in the journal that I was an editor on.
Really?
Wow.
Oh, that's cool.
Small world.
And
Yeah,
then
this month,
Wendy had sent the registration link in the chat session if anybody wants
I want to
to.
thank all of you for letting Jeff pull me into the group. I really enjoyed it. Nice to meet you guys online. And I met Jeff in Tuscaloosa. And the fact that he later moved to my hometown does not mean he's a stalker. I just want to.
It also doesn't mean that I'm not.
All right. So next month we are going to read Frank Sonnets by Diane Seuss.
Well, it's from one extreme to the other. I
Yeah,
mean,
this is a big
if
book.
you've already been reading some of this book.
Big book. Mm.
Um,
So, and it's pretty, I haven't read it yet, but it scares me. It has pages actually
it's big. It's big. It's a big
Yeah.
book. It'll,
that unfold in the middle of it.
Oh.
it probably win the Pulitzer Prize. That's been my prediction, probably.
Like, see that?
Wow.
That group of women I'm part of that's on the West Coast, Poets on the Coast that I've mentioned before,
Yeah.
they are big into Diane Seuss. And I have a friend who teaches at Colorado College, who I went to graduate school with, Jane Hilberry. She's the daughter of Conrad Hilberry.
Yeah.
They're both poets. But she's friends with Diane Seuss. So I'm really excited that you chose this book because I've never read her. So
I like her a lot.
yeah.
I've read her past books.
Yeah.
What was the
I've
one?
got all of her.
Four-Legged Girl. Four-Legged Girl was the one I really liked. Well, we'll see if we can somehow. She's findable. So we'll see if we can get her to come. That'd be cool. Okay, so that will be in June. Let's see what date that will be.
22.
Well, the 3rd is the 15th. The third
Oh, the
Tuesday is
third
15th,
Tuesday. Okay.
because the month starts on a Tuesday. Okay, so we'll go with the 15th. All right. Well, thank you guys. It was so good to see
Thank you all
everybody.
very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Everybody
See y'all.
take care.
Good night.
Good night. All right.
You know, stop recording. You know.